Hello guys and gals, and welcome back to another episode of Haunted Gaming. This time we're taking a look at a Yoshi story creepypasta called Marisa's Story. When I was attending university, my roommate Taylor and I were almost inseparable. We shared similar tastes in just about everything, which I suppose is why college dorm life went on without a hitch. Taylor and I were ravenous fans of Nintendo, spending all of our free time with his Super Nintendo, playing through the Donkey Kong Country and Super Mario titles. Well, life carried on for both of us. He went on to video game design with some relatively low-key American developer, and I went on to my writing. Just recently, some sad news came my way. Taylor had committed suicide via an aspirin overdose. It came as a shock to me, thinking that the chipper and eccentric man I once knew would have just taken such a turn. But a lot can happen in the better half of 2 decades. We hadn't spoken in years, and a part of me wished I would have kept in touch. Maybe I could have helped him. In any case, Taylor lacked many close relatives aside from his sister and his parents, both incredibly old and feeble. I got along well with his sister for almost as long as I knew Taylor, and she had asked me to help me move his things out of the house. I went along, attempting to do the decent thing and help her out, and on an overcast September afternoon, I arrived at the location. The house looked almost too large for any one man, which was confounding as his sister knew of nobody else lodging with him, and Taylor always seemed to prefer snug urban abodes to his quiet home on the outer suburbs. Inside, the house's many rooms had fallen into disrepair, surfaces caked with a uniform coating of dust. It looked as if no rooms had been used save for a small study stacked with computers and file cabinets. His kitchen and a living room he had haphazardly converted to double as a bedroom. I found it curious that he seemed to avoid traveling up the second floor altogether, an assumption supported by the same unbroken dust on the stairs. Packing was a breeze with the little clutter Taylor had lying around. Amazingly, I had found a small box tucked in the corner of his living room containing the old treasure trove of SNES titles we had played. Alas, any of the nostalgia I could have held was sourced by the poignant realization that Taylor was gone. That this hallowed memory I had held was made sad and incomplete by his untimely end. I was once again haunted by the sheer confusion of why he would do this, not telling anyone or reaching out for help. I worked past the sadness and anger, forcing myself to close up the cardboard flaps of the box and carry them to the trailer we had hitched to his sister's truck. His sister, when faced with the game, simply insisted that I take them. Nobody else had any use for the things, and she fell out of all the people Taylor knew. He would have wanted me to have them. She gave me the SNES games, as well as a second box full of games for the PC. I accepted them begrudgingly. I had no intent of playing them for fear of having a breakdown once the full brunt of his death hit me. But it was the least I could do, I suppose. Bringing the boxes home, I sighed to myself in exhaustion. Setting it alongside my relatively meager collection of Wii games, my preoccupation with my writing made me less and less of a fervent gamer, so almost all of my titles were casual games or kid games for my nephews during their visits. For days they had barely crossed my mind as I carried on my work, but one night in particular, my curiosity simply piqued at the thought of what was in the other box of games. Opening it, I saw games like Roller Coaster Tycoon and the old Quake games, mingling with games like Crysis and Bioshock. I thought they all looked fairly neat, though many would have been simply too taxing for my computer. It was then that I saw it, a small, blue USB thumb drive tucked into the corner of the box, as if it had fallen between the cracks of the other game boxes and dug into the small niche. I assumed that it was for any games that I had no physical storage for, given all the memory dedicated to his game development work. My curiosity driving me even further, I dared plug the thumb drive into my computer. On it there was simply a Super Nintendo emulator and a file named Marisa's Story. It must have been some game that he couldn't get a physical copy of, perhaps a rare game or something not released in the US. I booted up the game and, putting in the time to move the files into my computer so they could run properly, what I was welcomed with was the opening of Yoshi's Story. This perplexed me. Before I could swear I saw a copy of the game in a box of an SNES titles, that one. Pressing on, I adjusted myself to the unfamiliar WASD keyboard setup. I am, by no means, a PC gamer, mind you, and selected one of the 3 new files. The game started me off with the typical level select screen, foregoing the introductory level altogether. I selected the first stage and started. The game appeared unchanged, except for the fact that every bottomless pit was covered up with blocks I couldn't break. So I could only die from contact with an enemy and losing Baby Mario for too long. I also noticed I was on my last life, so I felt compelled not to allow Baby Mario from straying too far. Upon swallowing an enemy, I found that I could not lay eggs with them, so I had to make do with spitting enemies at obstacles in lieu of throwing eggs. As I kept playing, I also noticed the color scheme was strangely more pastel and washed out. And between levels, my Yoshi never changed colors, but stayed the same pistachio green color. I progressed surprisingly easy through the first few levels, I remember playing bits of Yoshi's Story when I was younger, and though I remember it very little, I could tell that certain things were off. Enemies seemed slow, rare, and harmless. Some, like the chomps, were absent altogether. With the few I faced hardly causing me any problems, Mario's cry, when I got hit, sounded more like a shrill. It was grating, more grating than normal, layered with a harsh computerized droning, as if it was damaging my speakers to play them. The game's color scheme also pulsed back and forth between his soft pastel tones and a harsh orange hue at a pace reminiscent of a pounding heartbeat. I could not put my finger on it, but getting hit made me feel exceptionally anxious, the unsettling noise and abrupt change in atmosphere spurring me to rush as quickly as I could to get Mario back, which was no easy task given my lack of eggs. One way or another, I pressed to the final level before Bert the Bashful's fort, and was met by another Yoshi. This time the other Yoshi, an odd magenta-colored one, had Mario, and ran slightly ahead of me, following what looked like a preset path to the end of the stage. While she avoided a good majority of the enemies by jumping or spitting them, as I had done, it appeared that this other Yoshi lacked eggs as well. She would occasionally get hit, spurring the same awful sequence. Both myself and this other Yoshi would pursue the baby, but he would always travel to the other Yoshi when retrieved. After completing what seemed like an escort mission after an incredibly long time, I started off on Bert's Fort. While the level title came up normally, I was startled by what followed. The colors had gone from their very pale palette to a darker one. It almost resembled the color of the normal game, but everything was just darker as if it was in a shadow. The stage was comprised by collapsing blue rocks, and the background was a stormy sky. I still did not have Baby Mario with me, but the other Yoshi was nowhere in sight. The normal fortress theme droned on, and it seemed to carry on an odd sense of urgency, as if something was wrong. The tempo had increased almost to match the same rhythm as the orange pulses when Mario was in his bubble. I pressed my Yoshi to run as quickly as possible. I finally reached the end of the stage, and at the end there was the magenta Yoshi and Baby Mario. Kamek flew overhead and delivered his usual spiel. However, the text was different this time. "You were too late. This is all your fault." Kamek flew back and forth across the screen, but he didn't drop any particles of magic this time. No, he just flew off. The game was playing that same musical jingle, and when he powers up an enemy into the fortress boss, except this time there was no boss, just screen shaking. It was then that I realized that the rocked magenta Yoshi and the baby Mario baby were on was just falling. I was still immobile for the cutscene. I had no choice but to watch as they plummeted off the screen. I heard Baby Mario's cries, still droning and horrific, but they gradually went quiet as the screen went dark. I was back at the level select screen, and the music had stopped, and all the levels I had beaten were locked up, as if I hadn't gotten to them yet. I played the only level I could, and entered the strange second act of the level. Every color was muted almost to grayscale, and the sound seemed distant and muted. My Yoshi was now gray, his sprite was edited, his face looking drawn out and weary, his head lower than usual, his whole body sunk down as if carrying an immense burden. Baby Mario was once again on his back, but details like his eyes were etched out, leaving what looked like an inanimate thing shaped like a baby. Yoshi moved slower now, and enemies were back to their usual difficulty. When Yoshi was hit, however, the baby didn't go up in a bubble, but simply fell limp to the ground. There was no crying, no star meter, nothing. You could pick up the thing when you pleased, and it simply reappeared on Yoshi's back when I touched it. I noticed that without it, Yoshi moved normally, but the screen would no longer scroll, forcing me to pick it back up. Whenever it seemed like it would go over into a bottomless pit, it simply stopped midair and landed on the end of whatever platform it was on, giving me no means of a game over. After slogging through a few levels of this morbid version of the game, I got to the castle. The castle's title was completely blank now, but the level itself played normally. My strange fake Baby Mario once again avoided descending into the pits or pools of lava, and I finally reached the boss room. This time the boss room was totally empty except for what looked like an egg block, its green spots replaced with a glitchy mess of pixels. The boss's room background also contained a lot of abnormalities, with messes of pixels scattered about. Kamek returned this time, stating, "Now you can hurt the one responsible. It is time to face punishment. He once again flew back and forth without emitting any magic and left. There was no boss theme, just the muted noise of Baby Mario crying incessantly. At times it seemed to fade between being almost inaudible to disturbingly clear, as if Mario should be on screen. Fortunately, there was nothing to do but spur the egg block to dispense its contents. The egg looked odd, it didn't have any spots, and instead of being egg-shaped, they were simple, uniform ovals of an off-white color. Growing frustrated and with nothing left to do but see what would happen, I began to throw the eggs at the walls. They bounced back and forth several times until one hit the Yoshi. He flashed abruptly and the screen went on a bit darker. I did this a few more times until the screen went completely black. Yoshi went into an animation of him spinning and kneeling over. And the game went dark. Immediately after the game crashed, refusing to be run again despite my best efforts, I couldn't help but wonder what it meant. Why would Taylor play such a horrid game? This couldn't have been what drove him over the edge, could it? I went back to his sister as soon as I could, and I asked her if she knew anyone by the name of Marisa. She looked distant and sad for a moment before reflecting back. Marisa was Taylor's fiancée a few years ago. They were engaged to be married, and Marisa was even pregnant with their child. One day, Taylor got her into an argument, and she drove out. There was a traffic accident shortly after, and Marisa and her child both passed away. Taylor was never the same since. I began to figure the guilt was too much for him. He kept working and living, but he wasn't himself anymore. It had hit me like a train. Taylor designed the game inside and out as a look into his own life, his guilt, and his death. It was a suicide note in its own twisted way. Taylor was focusing all of his rage and pain into programming that terrible thing. The first act was a dream sequence, a perfect world of pastels and simplicity broken only by his fear of losing his child. The fort was the night of Marisa's death, and the last levels were the years leading up to Taylor's suicide, a long, painful road of hardship and isolation. I thanked the sister for her time and apologized for the intrusion. She said it was fine, and she was glad to get it off her chest. I regret not being there for him, not helping him. I wish I would have known. I would have stayed close. Maybe he would have been okay. I guess there's no point in complaining about what I cannot change. If I stay clinging to the past, it might slowly eat away at me, as it did with him. All I can really do is move forward now. I hope all of you reading this won't hesitate to take some time to stay connected to old friends, so that this might not happen again. Well, that was morbid as hell. The feels were strong here as this creepypasta came full circle. Now right off the bat, I gotta say the build-up and length were very good. Instead of beating around the bush or lacking necessary details, it started off with a short and sweet first act, detailing the acquisition, which, might I add, is very plausible and much better than the cliches we've encountered from creepypasta's past. Then we move on to the second and main act, with the uncovering of the games and discovery of this flash drive, which once again sounds very plausible, as it's coming from a deceased game developer, and a USB flash drive that's unmarked is very common, and a lot of people have them lying around. It's good for storage, and it can be anywhere. It's not throwing some unrealistic aspect at you. I mean, it's not like, Bootman Bill is throwing a shuriken CD into your eyes saying, glitch.exe, but that set aside, you come across this game which doesn't really just throw blood and gore at you. It's rather the slow, methodical decline into this video game hell. And that's what I like. It can throw blood, gore, a lot of, creep, even demons, a lot of things at you. Anything in the world, as long as it's put in properly, serves its purpose, and delivers that slow decline into the video game hell, where the atmosphere becomes foreboding and the imagery becomes darker and darker until the end, when, at least in this creepypasta, things reached full circle and they detailed a grim tale leading up to the suicide of Taylor. It's a sad ending, but it fits in with that slow decline, and that personalization of the writing that was in this tale really adds to the effect, and it really, really sets us apart from other creepypastas too. I gotta say, at the end of the day, it's a much better tale in the sense that it stays coherent and it doesn't throw in unrealistic elements. It dodged a lot of technicality issues with adding a game developer and making this a hard-coded game rather than an alleged ROM hack, which raises up a lot of red flags with the hacking community devoted to said game. It serves its purpose and intrigues as well as delivers an eerie feeling to the reader as time goes on, and the ending hits hard, and does so with very good effect, rather than ending up in a way which leaves you confused and unsatisfied. I really don't have much more to say aside from this. I thought it was well done, and it served its purpose, and really I'd be nitpicking since all three acts flowed very smoothly. What would you rate this creepypasta, and what would you change to make it better? This has been another episode of Haunted Gaming, and if you like what you saw, then like, comment, and subscribe. This is me, Muda Heart. I am out.